So I would just like to congratulate all 5 speakers on really amazing presentations. I'm so moved and I'm so inspired for the next generation of scholars and artists. But my question is specifically for Barb. And so I was just wondering if you could comment on what you're describing in theater, and of course you're locating it within society, of course. But to what extent do you think that you're seeing the lack of elderly narratives and stories in theater? Is that at all separate from Hollywood, where we've got this cult of youth and beauty, which are somehow synonymous? And do you think there's a gendered aspect to this? Is it more with women, female characters?
Great questions. I'm not sure, I'm not a film historian, although I watch movies. There's a consistency in North America, I think, between the lack of older bodies on stage and what we see on the screen in the movie theaters. If I really enjoy watching a lot of Scandinavian TV shows and movies, and you see a much wider range of ages appearing in those in British films and things like that. So it's something to do with our society seems to be kind of one of my, isn't that interesting places. And as for being gendered, in theater, I haven't gotten to the granularity yet of male versus female. What I do know is that plays that are performed outside of urban areas tend to be the ones that have older characters in them, and that there is a preference in comedy to have older characters than in dramatic works. So that's another, what's with that? And when I finish the inventory of I'm kind of a big picture to small picture person. Once I've gathered all the information about Canadian professional theatre, and I may have to extend to 10 years to get a goodly number of older characters to look at. Once I go there, then I'm going to do the granularity of what have we got here, gendered, male, female, other sort of ages. There are a lot more plays that have older characters in them, but it's often about what are we going to do with dad because he's going off his nut. So, and that's good because it's a reality of modern life, but it's kind of bad because now people think that everyone who's old is demented. So there's a lot of work to do to kind of peel back what we're actually seeing on the Canadian stage to answer that type of question more thoroughly.
We've got 3 questions I can see. So the first one is to Parasa, then Vid, and then Josh.
Okay, thanks for letting me go first. So I have 2 questions. That's cheating, right? But it's okay. So they're for different people. So the first one, I'll keep them brief, but the first one's for Connor. I really like this idea of reconstruction. And I'm wondering if you are familiar with Collingwood's theory of history and historical reconstruction of the past. The reason I ask that is because for him, history really is about taking, he was an archaeologist, actually, so this is probably one of the reasons he has this perspective, but he thought that writing history was about taking pieces of material evidence and constructing, really, through imagination, a narrative that was consistent with those pieces of evidence. So, he sort of talks about there are certain points, that are fixed, and then you sort of draw the web. So my question is, do you think that challenges you said something about, actively fictionalizing, and I'm wondering if that throws a wrench a little bit in a good way, in the distinction between factualizing and fictionalizing in reconstruction.
Connor McKinnon. I think like as you know, it's easy to use the term reconstruction and construction interchangeably there, and I do think that all reconstructions are just constructions. You know, even though it may have the goal to recreate something, it is a new thing. And I guess like that bridging of the gaps, that's in kind of a technical sense in literally what I'm doing, that is a big part of it. But I think it's going beyond that, right? Instead of trying to fit something into a existing narrative, maybe it's the development of something that leads to a new narrative, or the potential to have something that doesn't fit nicely within kind of the grand narrative or within the canon. Not that it's like real or anything like that, but it's what can be gleaned from that process. Like that handle that I mentioned at the end, you know, at first when I was using it, I only held it in one way. You know, in my mind, it was this way. But once I had that 3D scan of it and I was manipulating it in space and started building off of it, I was like, oh, maybe it goes the other way around. And once I had that in my mind, I was like, it's so obvious that that's the way it was, right? But I needed to start building something new from it to understand something about its reality. So yeah, that's where my interest is in.
So it sounds like maybe more space to be more radical, really. That's what I'm hearing. So that's great. Thanks for answering my question. I'm just going to go straight to my other one, which is about Breen. I was wondering, I've forgotten the name of the artist who you were telling us about, but I was wondering if... Amin Gulji. Okay, thank you. I was wondering if mysticism or Sufi mysticism, for example, maybe had any kind of influence on the way that he constructs his artwork, and the way that he sort of looks at communicability and also the personal nature of what is being explored in artwork. So that's one question, like, is there an influence there? And also, one thing I was thinking about when I was thinking through your presentation about the connections with mysticism and Sufism was, well, you know, you were saying that that the audience doesn't understand what's, you know, they can't understand the writing, right? That there's no understanding there, right? But the interesting thing, I guess, is that, and, you know, another way of interpreting it is that, okay, there is something being understood, but it's not text, it's not textuality, right? It's because once you make, say you have this kind of thing that's being communicated or transmitted through the artwork, there is an audience there, right, that is participating, that is viewing it, but maybe what's being communicated is like something that spills over the boundaries fixed by text, right? So I was wondering if that's consistent, really, with your understanding of what he's doing, that rather than it being not understandable, it's not a textual understandability, it's a different kind of understandability, you know?
Yeah, so when I say non-understandable, I meant that he's taking the text from the Quran, which is, if you, in the Pakistani culture, in that context, Quran is respected, always put on the really height in the homes or everywhere. And then when you write the text, you really are very careful that you are not even leaving a dot or a case marking behind. So it's really important for its readability, and also just to respect that these are the words from the God, from the Almighty. This is not someone's handwritten that we can ignore it, or if the dot is missing here or the case marking is there, it does not matter. No, it matters a lot in the culture. So what he's trying is basically, he's deconstructing it completely to the level that people cannot recognize it. So for example, if I go into that installation and I know Arabic, I know Urdu, I may only read 2 words or 3 words if I really carefully look at it. I won't be able to get to surah number this, ayah number 5. It is really, really difficult. The way he had deconstructed it, the content is just lost in somewhere in the art forms. I may not be able to tell that this is the sentence that he's referring to in the Quran. And therefore, he said that the experiential part of it is very personal, very intimate. He knows where the text is. He says that when he started 10, 15 years ago, the text was more readable, more legible, and evident. But now he said, I now know the pattern of it. I have understood it to an extent that now I can deconstruct and make meaning out of it for my own good. So that's what he's trying to do. And the second question about mysticism, I would say yes, because in Pakistan, we have mysticism, we have Sufism. Sunniism is the most celebrated religion for the entire country, but we have so much diversity, so many different faiths under the roof of Islam that people practice. And Multan, for example, a city in Pakistan, is called the City of Shrines. And Karachi, which is in the Sindh, has so many shrines, and Sufi literature is very much there too. And he was one of those people who really went on the streets and worked with local people to learn the technique, because he never went to art school. He was doing his economics degree and just got interested in art. So he has learned from local people there who would live their life on a very organic way. Sufi poetry is very common. So it's really, I would say yes, he is inspired by mysticism. He listens to poetry, he reads a lot. So there is no doubt that we can see the hints there. Yeah.
We've got a question traffic jam, so we've got Vid, then Josh, then Alan, and then Anna.
Thanks so much. Great presentation. My question is for Rupa and also Ambreen, which is one of the topics we've been discussing is this contrast between religion and spirituality, also with Jessica's talk and elsewhere. And I guess I was just wondering, to what extent do you think the artists that you're discussing, where do you think they exist on that continuum? You know, is there some kind of tension there with sort of religions, as in terms of administrative structures, or not? Are they kind of compliant, or yeah?
So Amin Gulji would say himself that I am a spiritual person, but when I ask questions about religion, he said it's very personal and it's onto me. So he regularly meditates, but he do not follow any institutionalized form of religion. So therefore, I think for him, it's very clear that his religion is very personal to him, and he do engage with meditation and spiritual practices, but he do not want to rely on, again, the prescribed narrative of what society expects him to do. He would do what he wants to do, because he says that my connection with the divine or with Almighty is my personal. There is nothing to do with the society. So that's, I think, he would clearly say that I am a spiritual person.
I can speak about one of the artists, Ashmina Ranjit in particular, but Bishan Rajmandari, I don't know his views, and same with Sujan Chitakar. But Ashmina Ranjit is very, she definitely identifies as spiritual. She has, a good part of her work is contending with Hindu patriarchy that dominates institutional structures and the sociology and the social structures of Nepal. But her work, it engages with it, and her work is very personalized. It's very much her. So there's an essence of her in it. She's working with, and then she's also working with the symbols of her faith. She's reusing them, repurposing them. But from her personal individual perspective. And when you even speak with her, she always has these very warm greetings. The essence of her comes through even in her conversations. So her engagement, she deeply engages with the religion of Nepal, which is dominant through and through. But it is her own, and that defines part of her practice. So, yeah.
Josh Fitzgerald.
George Clooney, actually. No, but it goes to what Barb's talking about with
gendered aspects of respect to actors. Anyway, so question real quick, double question for Rupa first, real quick, and then one for Max. How do you think that these great, I love the talk and how these artivisms, maybe if I could use that too, will be incorporated into the reconstruction efforts, and how will reconstruction efforts maybe change the structures in the end? Maybe will they be improved in a way with new, how do you feel the community is going to, just maybe thoughts if you can think about that. And then real quick for Max, how did the sort of crisis that surrounded the craft, how do you feel it helped or hindered, or how did it sort of inform? Because I was really fascinated by this sort of some murky or misty or milky quality to the process. And I'm wondering if there's something there about uncertainty or what you were feeling. Maybe get it if it's I don't know if you want to speak to that. But anyway, those are my questions.
In terms of the reconstruction aspect, sorry, you're gonna have to paraphrase again what your question was. I just want to know the heart of it again. Sorry.
How will the artwork be? Will the mural be maybe brought into the? Do you feel that the community would want to incorporate that if it's been enough time to sort of even think about this sort of thing, or how reconstruction efforts might bring the artistic endeavor into the reconstruction,
Right.
And then maybe how the reconstruction efforts affect the buildings themselves.
I think so. The cultural activism was twofold. There was a response that, like in the talk, it responded at the emotional level to help facilitate the healing and the responding to the trauma, the devastation. But there's another level that I think is hugely important, is that it sent out a public message. It wasn't just for the individual artist's catharsis. It was like, hey, look, we need to do something about this. Or it mobilized people because other people saw that wall mural and they had the sentiment, oh, I miss my Kasmandapa, where is it? So there was the broader communication that it could project. And in the case of, in particular with rebuilding the Kasmandapa or the wall mural, it did gain, because it was a large work of technically graffiti, and there's a large graffiti community in Nepal, because for so long the arts have been meant for the upper caste. The accessibility has been challenged by different groups. So there is a large graffiti community that is linked to the international graffiti community, which has also been seized upon by media, social media, etc. So it was also a call to, hold the authorities in Nepal, because that was what was one of the hindrances to the recovery and the humanitarian efforts, is that the Nepali government is sort of in crisis itself. It's in turmoil. So the monies that were flowing to it, they actually couldn't help the country. So it was artists, citizens, NGOs, all the other offshoots, the other groups who were supporting the humanitarian recovery efforts. So having said that, that wall mural was there was a message also to tell the authorities that we value our heritage and our buildings, and we need these things rebuilt. And similarly with rebuilding Bungamati being a smaller community, it wasn't getting the attention that it needed to rebuild. For example, because it wasn't designated by UNESCO, UNESCO was funneling their monies to the main centers that were designated, but that heritage community in Bungamati, it is essential to the country, to its culture, its vibrancy, economics, etc. So when you have an artist like Sujan Chitrakar, he has the ability to coalesce all those pieces to get its reconstruction, but it's also it's a broader message, to sort of respect our heritage, and it's still relevant in the present, given the modernity of the country too. So
We'll just take 3 more questions. Alan. And sorry, Max.
No worries. Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's definitely. So yeah, I mean, to kind of reiterate the idea of what direct impacted crisis have on my artistic decisions, and then kind of like in reference to the murkiness or uncertainty of the imagery. Yeah, I think that in a lot of ways, my experience of COVID, and I think for a lot of people, it was this intense digitization of every aspect of our lives, right? Like this coalescing of social life and work life, in addition to the way that things like experiences of like commerce or whatever. All of these things are taking place digitally, and the way that I think that the digital technology. And my experiences of it were so directly related to like a lack of spontaneity and a very pointed experience, very guided, pointed experience. I think a lot about how images function in digital spaces and how it's this process of constant filtering and refining, like not just in the literal filtering of images, but also through algorithms and the sort of encouraging of the most relevant, clear images, and the way that algorithms kind of, they filter images in a different way rather than just, let alone the filtering that goes on social media. But I guess what I see myself as doing is kind of the opposite of that. It's taking an image and putting it through this process of a transition where spontaneity is introduced, and it acquires these kind of marks that come out of the process. It gets endowed with mistakes and things that are out of my control, and I have to react to and respond to, and it becomes this kind of dance back and forth of trying to pull things one way or another. And the surprises are so important. And I think also in the lack of like a real specific pointed image, to me that's also crucial in kind of a, I think if anything, crisis is what it's done is illuminated my values in the sense that I value the opposite of what COVID brought into my life.
Alan, and then we'll have Anna, and finally Rosalia.
And Breen, you started with a very vivid graphic of the dynamics of crisis in the formation of Pakistan itself. And then you left that social relationship behind. And yet you're talking about an artist who's clearly indebted to Sufi, who's pulverizing the Quran. And I'm aware that some Sufi shrines have been attacked in Pakistan, and that there is a process of ideological weaponizing of Islam in Pakistan. So I'd like to learn more about the reception of this artist's work, because when I was looking at it, thinking in context, I was thinking, whoa, this is very controversial.
Yeah, you're right that this is controversial, and but he has not received any negative comments about his work, so I didn't see anything in media. I was there when he showed his work in Islamabad particularly, and I saw it again in his own gallery. People would come visit. It's surprising to me too, actually, that his work is really posing some questions to the government and also to the religious leaders. But I think he is lucky in that way that he is not being criticized. And I think one way that his own personality, and he's not only active in his own personal practice, but he's also engages with social issues, which I did not discuss in this presentation just because of the 10-minute. I only focus on one of his works. So he had other works where he would really comment on social issues and he was the one who brought art in the social spaces. Art as an art world in Karachi, in Pakistan particularly, is a tool for elites, as I think in everywhere in the world, that art is considered as the elite, premium kind of thing that not everyone could enjoy. But he was the one, I think 5 years ago, he brought Karachi Biennale, in which he brought all the art on the streets, in the public spaces. And he was very clear that art belongs to people, not to elites. And therefore, it was important for him to talk with his own people and bring pieces to people who are living in small vicinities and or schools or government buildings which are being closed due to construction issues or whatever. So he basically activated those buildings and made them alive again. So he's really so much active in socio-political issues as well. But for this presentation, as I thought that it would be wonderful to share that there are many ways to deal with crisis. Some people just come up front and resist it outwardly, but some people just go inside and find inner voice. So that's what I was trying to show.
Anna O'Meara.
Thank you all for your beautiful presentations. I have a question for Barbara. I thought that your opening was so relevant and powerful, especially when you talked about the personal connections to crises in hospitals. And, you know, I'm not sure if you have a sense as to what, you know, hospitals should do next, who does. But in terms of representation and theater and discussing one of perhaps the most pertinent traumas and crises of our time, do you, and in hospitals in particular, do you have thoughts on that?
There's an interesting time lag that happens between crisis and theater. I think people need a period of time to consider how best to represent things on stage. Even though we're 10 years after Canada's withdrawal from Afghanistan, we haven't seen a lot of theater that deals with that. Started to see some art installations have been coming up in the last 5 years, but not so much theater. I think because these stories are difficult to tell. These stories are about reconciliation. These are about healing. And it's not my field, but applied theater works with communities to create performance pieces where the community itself works through the issues and comes to reconciliation that is then presented in the form of a performance. And so I think there's a lot of potential for healing through the use of applied theater techniques, bringing families who lost loved ones together with hospital staff who were, I mean, I think of all of it, I would have hated to have been on the medical or assisting staff who had to make those decisions that I've got a 12-hour shift and there's 2 of us. Who are we going to feed? Who are we going to water? Who are we going to medicate? And so there's a lot of trauma, and my daughter is still traumatized. And so I think that's probably the form that we'll first see being used to create this, these moments of healing.
Rosalia.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for your absolutely amazing talks. My question was actually very similar to Alan's, but it was precisely about the social dimension and the possibility of social activation through the performances that were staged inside Amir's. This is my questions for Anbreen. Amir's installation of sculptures, because you discuss the way in which he deconstructs the language into visual forms. But what role did the performances play in adding to the experiential part of the of his artistic kind of aim?
Yeah, so I think it played a huge role. So for example, the love letters. What he did, he asked everyone, whoever was coming to experience the performance as well as installation, he asked everyone to take a piece of paper, write a love letter to whoever they like, roll it and put it in the bottle. And those bottles there were kept just next to the installation, so with the walls. So those bottles became the part of the installation. And then they were destroyed. No one would read that. So the connection that he was trying to make through his own personal artistic endeavors, he gave the opportunity to the audience to make that personal connection with whoever they would like to make. And again, then putting those bottles, glass bottles, into the installation, then it became the piece of the artwork itself. So I think it's, again, emphasizing that personal connection, but also giving an agency, because many artists would give their artworks a description or a title. Amin would really hate that. He says that when I create art, it's my process, it's my journey. And when I create it, I present it to the audience. And it's for them to understand. It's for them to interpret. I don't want to give the prescribed narrative to them. I want them to engage. And he would allow people to touch his artwork, which is, again, sometimes people really mind if people touch the artwork in the museum or in the gallery. He says, touch my artwork, try to engage with that. And he really gives that connection to everyone that he himself feels in the art process.
Can we all have a round of applause for all of the students this afternoon? And can I say that all of the speakers, we've had, as I say, 17 of the last 2 days, have been extraordinary. That every paper has been so moving and varied and inspiring and provocative. It's been an extraordinary experience to listen to all of them. So thank you to all the speakers. I just, although we've heard from lots of different people, I just wanted to give the final word to Jeffrey, because he would have liked to have had the final word. And I'm just returning to the words that I used of his that started this this forum, and I'll just read them again to you. I was born in the shadow of the end game. I am an artist. Art is an act of will in accord with a mature conscience. There can be no resignation. The artist is witness to existence itself. Art is the celebration. And I think, as I say, in those 6 sentences, he captured a lot of what we have discussed over the last 2 days.